Gucci is crowned the world's hottest brand. Throughout its 100-year history, it's been worn by royals, first ladies, and celebrities. Today, it's no longer exclusively for the elite and remains the ultimate status symbol. And it all started with a dishwasher, waiter, and bellhop. On March 26, 1881, Gucci was born in Florence, Italy. His parents were humble merchants who made straw hats and expected Gucci to take over. But by the time he turned 17, the business went bankrupt and the family fell apart. Driven out of his house by his father, Gucci hopped on a freighter to England. Once he arrived, one of London's most lavish hotels, the Savoy, took him in. There, he worked as a dishwasher, waiter, bellhop, and later an elevator attendant. The job was considered a big deal since the hotel was the first in the world to have an electric elevator, and it gave Gucci the rare opportunity to observe its wealthy and famous guests up close. He noticed that all of them traveled with elegant handbags and luggage that were more than just functional items. They were status symbols. He also learned that they were obsessed with the idea of quality and cared very little about the cost. After a few years, Gucci saved enough money to return to Florence and start a new life. He worked for an antique store, married a dressmaker named Ida Cavelli, and started a family. But when the First World War broke out, Gucci was forced to leave home again and serve in the army. Fortunately, he survived and returned to Florence when the war ended. The city's economy was destroyed, but Gucci found work at a company that specialized in quality leather products. The owner taught Gucci the basics of the trade, including how to work with different types of leather. Gucci learned quickly and was asked to open a new store in Rome as their manager. Ida refused to leave Florence, so Gucci had no choice but to travel back and forth. Each time that he returned home, he longed to open his own shop in Florence more and more. One Sunday, Gucci and Ida went for a stroll around Florence. While walking by a narrow side street, they spotted a small shop for rent. Ida encouraged Gucci to take over and pursue his dream of opening up a shop in the city. With her blessing, Gucci didn't hesitate and pulled their savings and a loan from an acquaintance. He called this shop Valigeria Gucci, but later shortened it to Gucci. The shop offered leather handbags and luggage that Gucci handpicked from suppliers in Tuscany, Germany, and England. More often than not, Gucci found himself having to commission unique pieces. His experience at the Savoy gave him a knack for sensing what wealthy tourists were likely to buy, and his suppliers fell short of offering them. Eventually, he grew tired of relying on his suppliers and opened a workshop to make and repair his own products. While they became popular among wealthy tourists and the local elite, Gucci was struggling in secret. His family and staff only discovered the truth after he could not hide his tears any longer. "He looked like a man facing a death sentence," one of them recalled. Like many entrepreneurs, Gucci struggled to turn a profit within the first few years of opening. Suppliers who let him buy goods on credit were demanding payment, and some clients did not pay what they owed. Gucci was strapped for cash to pay for his bills and had no choice but to give in to what he had feared most. "Unless a miracle happens, I can't stay open another day," Gucci admitted to his family and staff. Gucci's future son-in-law could not bear to see him in pain as though he was facing a death sentence, so he offered to give him a loan from the savings he put aside to marry his daughter Grimalda. Gucci humbly accepted. Within the next few months, he was able to pay back the loan in full and hire a team of artisans. Each one was responsible for completing a product on their own from start to finish. Sometimes the process involved putting together 100 different pieces and took an average of 10 hours. As Gucci's business and team grew, Italy's leadership changed. Several nations imposed harsh sanctions on the country, and Gucci could no longer buy all the leather he needed. To save his shop from closing a second time, he took a chance on making new products. First, he made handbags and luggage with both canvas and leather. Leather was only applied to the most used parts of the products: the corners, clasps, and straps. Later, he expanded his product line with accessories, including belts, wallets, and shoes. His loafer was the first in the world to have a gilded snaffle. Meanwhile, one of Gucci's sons, Aldo, was thinking bigger. He had traveled all over Europe and discovered many were interested in his family's products. Why not bring Gucci to them, he thought to himself. When he brought up the idea of expanding to other cities, Gucci shot him down. He believed it was too risky and doubted they could come up with the money. Aldo remained convinced that it was a great opportunity and secretly asked their bank for a loan. Guccio eventually caved in and opened a second shop in Rome. It turned out to be the family's savior when the Second World War broke out and Rome became an open city. Soldiers swarmed the shop to buy anything that they could send to their mothers, wives, or girlfriends back home. When the war ended, Guccio scrambled to get loans from several banks to keep both shops open. And while he remained short on supplies, his team continued to make new and more unique products with what they had, including bamboo-handled and pigskin bags. By the early 1950s, Guccio ran a third shop in Milan. Meanwhile, his sons Aldo, Rodolfo, and Vasco were far from home. They secretly flew to New York to find a location for their first American store. With a $6,000 bank loan in their pocket, they settled on a small shop just off of Fifth Avenue. When Guccio found out through a telegram, he was furious. "Come home immediately, you crazy boys," he cabled back. To him, their plans were nothing more than a reckless scheme, but once again, he caved in. Unbeknownst to his sons, it would become one of the last things that he could do for them. One year later, Guccio's first American shop opened in New York. It made history as one of the first Italian labels to have its own store in the city and was known as one of the most exclusive labels in Europe. Royals and celebrities worldwide were fans, including Queen Elizabeth II, Princess Grace of Monaco, Jackie Kennedy, Sophia Loren, Elizabeth Taylor, and Katharine Hepburn. It was clear that New York was just the beginning of a worldwide expansion and that the Gucci family had much to celebrate. But 2 weeks after opening their store, celebrations came to a halt. Guccio dropped dead from a heart attack as he prepared to go to the cinema with Ida. In his will, he left Gucci in the hands of Aldo, Rodolfo, and Vasco. Grimalda, whose husband once saved the company from closing, was given nothing. She tried to fight her brothers for a share of the company in court, but returned home empty-handed. Afterwards, business continued as usual. Aldo focused on expanding Gucci abroad, Rodolfo managed its store in Milan, and Vasco ran its factory in Florence. Meanwhile, Gucci's reputation was growing among the elite. And it was all thanks to a product that Aldo once snubbed and many called bizarre: loafers. When Gucci released them in New York, stiletto heels were all the rage. But soon after, women caught on to the comfort and chicness that loafers offered. Eventually, Gucci's loafers became a must-have among men as well. In fact, Frank Sinatra was known to have a large collection. Over the next few years, Gucci continued to make its mark by opening dozens of stores worldwide and expanding into clothes, perfumes, and watches. It became widely known as a status symbol and unseemingly untouchable, until history repeated itself. 2 years after Gucci launched perfumes and watches, Vasco passed away from cancer. He had no children, so his stake in Gucci was given to his widow, Maria. Aldo and Rodolfo bought her out and split the shares 50-50. Later, Aldo split 10% of his shares with his sons Giorgio, Paolo, and Roberto. Meanwhile, Rodolfo refused to give a single share to his only son, Maurizio. While collectively the sons had a small stake in the company, it was inevitable that they would have to step up. Gucci's business had increased 25 times over the previous decade. Still, Giorgio, Paolo, and Maurizio strayed from their commitments and even rebelled. Giorgio secretly opened his own shop using the family name. Paolo started his own label and outed his father for tax evasion. And after Rodolfo passed away, Maurizio was handed half of the company and kicked Aldo out. From then on, Maurizio became hungry for even more power. He was convinced that the only way that was possible was if he bought his family out, but he didn't have enough money and would need to find an investor. Bankers were intrigued by the idea but were skeptical that a deal would be possible because of all the family feuds. Fortunately, one private investment firm, InvestCorp, was crazy enough to take the risk. They were hardly known in the financial world, but had made a fortune by saving and taking Tiffany & Co. public. 2 years after a deal was signed, Maurizio successfully bought his family out. But under his leadership, Gucci's glory days were gone, and the company started losing $30 million a year. InvestCorp agreed to save the company under one condition: Maurizio had to leave. Maurizio fought back but eventually walked away. 2 years later, his body was found slumped outside his office in Milan. His ex-wife Patrizia Reggiani hired a hitman to murder him. Carrying on Guccio's legacy was now left to Investcorp and its new creative director, Tom Ford. Tom replaced Gucci's grunge look with glamour, and soon after, Hollywood went Gucci. From then on, he created must-have pieces every season. His bold designs led to Gucci reaching record profits of more than $1 billion a year and 2 successful IPOs. Today, Gucci is worth over $17 billion and crowned the world's hottest and fastest growing luxury brand. It's also favored amongst millennials and teens, thanks in part to bringing in an outsider. This is the story of how a dishwasher built a billion-dollar luxury brand that survived a series of war, bankruptcy, and family feuds,